Today we're going to tackle a coding challenge I've named the sum of all fears. And that's a pretty popular challenge going around on the internet, and it was supposedly asked during an interview at Google. So let's take a quick look at what we're going to build, and then let's jump into the code. So today we're going to build a very simple website, and this website will allow us to solve this challenge. But let's detail what this challenge is. It's detailed here in the description on our page. It's given a list of numbers and a number k. Return whether any two numbers from the list add up to k. For example, given an array of 10, 15, 3, and 7, and a k of 17, return true since 10 plus 7 is 17. Okay, so that's a pretty tough challenge, we think, but I think we can meet it. Well, let's find out what we're going to build. So I'm going to allow you to enter in any number you want, and then I'm going to push the find button. And you can see here we have an array of 10, 15, 3, and 7. And the results is true because 10 plus 7 is 17. What happens if we enter in 15 and we hit find? The results change to false because no two numbers in this list add up to 15. So let's do it one more time. So let's say we enter in the number 10. That returns true because 3 plus 7 is 10. And the same holds true for 18. And that would be 15 plus 3 would be 18. So that's what we're going to build today. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to hop into Visual Studio Code. And Visual Studio Code is a code editor by Microsoft, and this is what we're going to use to build our solution today. So this is Visual Studio Code, and the way this works is everything that we're going to build here is contained in a folder, and I already have a folder set up for this project. And so inside this folder, I've got a couple of files already in this. I've got a style sheet, and I've got our logo here. And we're going to use these two things to build the application I just showed you. So one thing that we need to do is, first things first, is that we need to build an index.html file. And we know that we're going to need an HTML file. And we also know that we're going to need a JavaScript file. And we're going to call that findsum.js. And so the first thing I want to do is build the UI out. So what we do here at Coder Foundry is we talk about how to win these interview questions or these whiteboard challenges. And we use the method of solve, talk, show. Now solve is the actual coding part. And while you're coding, you should be able to really explain in detail how this works. And then the show part is how do we visualize the function, or how do we utilize it? And then we follow things like separations of concerns so that we can show how the front end is separate from the back end. So talking about it and showing it and solving it is all the three things that you need to do. Now what we're going to build today, you could whiteboard this, which we recommend that you practice whiteboarding and record yourself. You also can put this on a portfolio site so that you can ship your portfolio to an employer, or you could just actually have this code in your repos, your Git repo, and you can ship code around. The cool thing about the way that we're coding this with just plain vanilla JavaScript and HTML and CSS is that it'll just run right out of a folder. They don't have to do restoring any packages or anything like that. So it's super simple to run and easy for a hiring manager to look at it. So let's start right away and let's build our front end web page real quick. So I've installed an extension called Emmet, and what that allows me to do is do some boilerplate stuff real quickly here. So what I did is I just scaffolded up a HTML page, and I'm going to give this a title, the sum of all fears, and we're hoping that this will show you how to defeat this fear, the fear of a coding challenge. And so hopefully here at Coder Foundry, we can help you do that. And that's the purpose of this, is to get you to think about coding challenges, and hopefully you can solve them. And so the other thing that we need to do is we need to probably add a links to our JavaScript. And so our JavaScript is can be linked to an HTML tag with a script tag. So I can type in script, and this thing has a source, and so source equals, and I called it find sum. .js. Okay, Visual Studio Code added some more extra stuff there. I also need to add into my style sheet, a link to my style sheet. And with style sheets, they use a different tag called link. And what I'm going to do here is just link over to that style sheet that I already had established before, that set up before. It's not super important about the style sheet, but it allows you to have it looking like I had like you're seeing in the demo here real quickly. Now we also have to give this a type, and that's real important, so that we make sure it's of a type. And then instead of source, we use something called href for this, and that style sheet is referenced right there. We have a link, and we can get our head tag. So those are the two ways that we get our style sheet and our find sum, our JS file, connected up to our front end here. Now the next thing we need to do is we're going to create some HTML here to lay out our page, and we're going to use a div like our container div here, and I'm going to give this a class. Now this class is contained in the style sheet that I provided, so you can go to our Get hub, the links are below, and you can go ahead and grab this so that you can have the style sheet and work with it, and you can modify it and change it however you want. But rev style is going to be our style that's going to control a lot of things as it cascades down through here. And so the next thing that I want to do is I want to add an image, and this is the logo file that I've built for this tutorial, and I'm just going to say source of that is the PNG. It's all contained in there, contained in one folder here, and then I'm going to add a class called responsive, and this class allows this image to grow and shrink with the size of the browser, so it's a little bit more responsive. And so as you make if the web page is small, it'll get smaller. If it's big, it'll get bigger. So then the next thing that I want to do is I want to create another div, and I want to give this a class, and I'm going to call this, and I've got it set up here, and it's called rev style heading B. And this is so I can show the instructions on what we're doing. Whenever you're building a coding challenge and you're sticking this on your portfolio, you always want to give the explanation of what this thing actually does, so that the end user who comes to it knows what the application is supposed to do. So I just cut and paste the description of the problem in there, and so that's going to be, just give us a div tag real quickly there to contain that description. So, you know, given a list of numbers and a number of k, return whether any two numbers from the list, etc., etc. So now what I want to do is, if you've used our other challenges, we have a style sheet that utilizes labels to set up like how we're going to show things. And so this span tag inside of a label is also contained in our CSS so that things will line up correctly. So I'm going to create just a label. This is enter a number, and then in there I'm going to create an input tag so that the end user can enter in the number 17 or any number that they want. Okay, so I'm not going to hard code the value. This will work for any number. Now, as you know, or you may not know, but the ID tag allows us to uniquely name controls on a web page so that JavaScript can find it. And in the case here, I'm going to call this the sum value, and this type I'm going to put in here is going to call number. And what this does is restrict input from the user to be only numbers, and that's real important for us, and it's so that they can't enter in strings or something like that and break our code. I'll give it a sum, name sum, and then I'm going to give it a value, and this value sets up the default. When the page starts up, it'll have a default value, and I'm going to set that to the 17, which is in the example given by given our problem declaration here. So that's all we need to do there. And so now we have a number on a page, or an input on the page that allows you to enter in a number. Okay, and we have our logo. So what we can do is I'll just show you real quickly how that looks. We'll get this started here. Now what I just clicked on there is Go Live, which is Live Server is an extension that I've installed in VS Code. Super handy so that we can run our code. And as you can see now, I've got this kind of built. I've got my logo, I've got my description, and you can see here we can enter in a number, whatever number we want. And if I change it here, just show you how this value works, I hit refresh. It changes back to the default value on 17. Okay, pretty simple so far. So let's close that down and let's keep on working here and then get the rest of the page built out. So the next thing I need to do is add the button that the user clicks so that they can actually call and run our function. So following what I'm doing with my CSS, I'm going to set up a span, and I'm going to give it blank so that this button will line up, be pushed a little bit to the right. And these values, these margins are set up in my CSS. It's not super important. And so I'm going to make another input, but this type is going to be equal to a submit. And this is just the actual button that someone can click. And it also has a value. And we're going to call the value, which is what's on the facing of the button, we're going to say find it. It could say OK or go or whatever you want to do. I'm going to say find it. Okay? And then that's all I need to do there for right now. So now I have a button on the page. Now the next thing I need to do is I want to display the array on the screen, because when we get down to version 4 of this, we're going to actually generate random numbers of arrays and allow the end user to input a number and then search those random array links, so that we want to show them what the array was. So it won't always be 10, 15, 3, and 7. It could be any random number. So let's add a label and add a span tag. And then the span tag that we're going to do here is going to say numbers to search. And then over in here, we're going to create a div in here just to break it up a little bit. Okay, and then in here, we're going to give this div an ID. Okay, and so again, the reason we're using IDs is so that JavaScript can find it, and we're going to call this num list. And then I'm going to put a default value of like 3 little check marks to show that there's nothing there yet, but it will soon have something when you click the button. So finally, what we need to do is add another label. I'm going to span, and I'm going to call this results. And before I do this, I'm going to add some breaking space here so that it goes down a couple of lines. Okay? And then I'm going to put a BR here. And then I'm going to put a P tag in there, or a paragraph tag, and I'm going to give it an ID equals to results. Okay, and so that way JavaScript can find this by this ID and then write its values in here. In the case of what we're going to show here, we would show true or false if in fact something has been found. So I'm going to save this, and we'll see if all of our work is good here. See what's going on. So as you can see, it doesn't do anything yet, but we've got our UI built pretty quickly, and it looks pretty cool. If you do ask me, I think it does. If you notice, the background here is a little bit different. It's not a solid color. It's what we call a CSS gradient. And so what I'll do is real quickly just show you how that was done. And basically in the body tag here, I have a background image, and I have this radial gradient CSS stuff. And I didn't make this. I went to, you can look up CSS background gradients or CSS gradients, and there's like multiple websites that create these. You input colors and then they'll generate the CSS for you. So I can't say that I made this, but I'm utilizing it. And I just thought I would make that aware in case you're building things and you want a cooler background than a solid color, or you're tired of white or whatever. Subtle gradients do look pretty nice on the web, and they work pretty well across most browsers. So it's pretty easy to do. But we're not here to build gradients. We're here to solve the sum of all fears. So let's get into the code to solve this. Okay, let's hop over to JavaScript. So the first thing that we need to do is, when we're solving any problem, is probably write down what we're trying to do and what we're trying to solve. Now, what I would recommend in a coding challenge like this, and you're on the whiteboard, is you could go ahead and pseudocode the things that you want to accomplish, the things you want to do. And you can do that with comments in your code too. Is another good way to do, is just to comment out your code. But the first thing we're going to need is a function, and we know that. And I'm going to call this function find sum a. Okay. And our function is going to take a couple of parameters. Now, we are going to use parameters because parameterized functions are necessary. And I think it shows you know a little bit more about JavaScript when you're using parameterized functions instead of hard coding everything in your answer, especially if you are going to be shipping this around or send your Git repo or something like that. So we created a function called find sum a, and it's got two parameters. Numbers, it's going to be an array of numbers. In our case, the 10, 15, 3, and 7. And the answer the user entered on the screen is going to be passed to this. So in the case of the default, it'd be 17. Okay, so now what we want to do is, what happens next? How do we actually solve this? Okay. So what are we going to do? So we're going to do what I call the brute force method, or the most obvious way that this could be achieved. And a lot of people probably would think about this right off the bat. But we're going to show you this way first, and then tell you why it's not the best answer. It does work, it's not the best, but then also show you why the other methods are better than this one. But I think it's fair for us to look at what we would call the most obvious answer. So what I've got here, let's take some comments code up here, and let's talk about what's going to happen here. So I think, again, to solve this challenge, it's just to write down what we want to do. So the one thing that we're going to do is I'm going to loop through the array and add numbers, add the adjacent number, and check for answer. So if you can visualize, or if you can audibilize your solution and what you need to do, then it gets a lot easier to solve these. So that's what I'm going to do. All right, so what do I need to do this? Well, first thing I need to do is I need to check if numbers are equal to 17. So I'm going to call this a check value, and I'm going to set it to 0 at first. Okay, and then I also need to have a Boolean variable that I can set to true or false. In other words, like if my check value equals the answer, I'm going to set found to true. Okay, and so what I need to do now is just loop through the array and create new check values with every number, add them together and check to see if they exist. So the first thing I need to do is loop through the array. Now, arrays is the reason they're asking for this. Is arrays. Now, arrays look like this internally: 15, 3, 7. Okay, so an array looks like this. Now, the one thing that the reason they ask this question is because they want to know if you know about JavaScript arrays. Now, here's the things that you need to know about arrays, and then we're going to utilize this information to actually solve this. So arrays consist of values, and this is the values: 10, 15, 3, and 7. Arrays also have indexes, which is the location of the value is the index. So 10 is found at index 0. Now, arrays start with 0, not 1. They start with 0. So index 0 has a value in the case of this array of 10. And then index 1 has a value of 15, index 2 has a value of 3, and index 3 has a value of 7. Now, what you may know is that there's actually 4 numbers here, so the length of this is 4. But since it starts at 0, the starting index is 0 and the ending index is 3, or length minus 1. Okay? So the start index equals 0, and the ending index equals 4 in the case of our, or 3, excuse me, in the case of our default data here. All right, so how do we loop over an array? Well, what we can do is we can use something called a for loop. Okay, and so our for loop is going to say let I equal to 0. And in other words, what we're saying is I'm going to start at 0. Okay, now as long as I is less than or equal to the numbers, which is our array being passed in, our parameter, you notice here it's got the parameter highlighted in both. We can check the length of that array, which will return 4. But we know that the ending index is 3, so we really want the length minus 1 or 2. Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to add adjacent numbers. So the first time I go through here, I'm going to take value or index 0. I'm going to get 10, and then I want to get the next one adjacent to it and add those two numbers together. When I get the last one, there's no adjacent number to add. And so if I tried to add the adjacent index, it would be called an out of bounds array, or throw an error. So really what I want to do is I want to stop here and find the adjacent number to the one before the end. Okay. And if I get to the end, there are no more other numbers to add, so we either found it or we didn't. If we get to the end, we didn't find anything. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set that to minus 2. So this would be 4 minus 2 is 2, and that would be this index here. So 0, 1, 2. Okay? Hope that makes sense. And then every time it loops, I'm going to add 1 to I. And that's the basis for looping through this array. So every time it loops through, it's going to go 0, 1, 2, and stop here. Okay? So that's what we want to do. Now, what happens, how do we check the adjacent number? And that's the problem here. And so I'm going to say loop over the array in the adjacent. Loop over the array after the current value. So I'm going to create another loop. Okay? And I'm going to say, we're going to call it y. All right? And we're going to say the y equals to, and I'm going to say it equals to the position that it's currently at in I plus 1. Okay? So that means that the first time through, I is going to be 0 and y is going to be 1. So it would pull back the index 10 and 15, exactly what we want. Okay? Now, the other thing that we want to do is we want to say, when do we stop looping here? And we want to loop all the way to the end. So we want to say numbers.length, and we want to have a minus 1. And then we want to add 1 to y for every loop. So we have two loops in here. One's internal, one loop inside of another, or a nested loop. And so what we're going to do is, now that we have both values, let's figure out how we could check them. And we can check them with an if statement. And so I'm going to say answer, if answer, and answer is the value the user entered from the screen, equals to the numbers sub I, which is this loop, outer loop here. The first time it's going to be 0, it's going to say if numbers I, and that's going to be 10. And I add to it numbers, and you're probably guessing what I'm going to do here. I'm going to add numbers y, because now I'm on the internal loop. And it's going to say I plus 1 and give me an index of 1, not 0. And that would give me a value of 15. Okay? If those two values, if answer equals the addition of these two numbers, the sum of these new numbers, then do something, okay? And so what we're going to do here is we're going to set found equals to true. And then we're going to do something called a return statement. And we're going to return found here. We're actually, if we find it, we're just going to exit everything and move on, okay? So then after all of this looping, we also want to add another return statement here, and we want to have found, okay? So that is kind of how it would work with two loops. Pretty simple, pretty basic, not all that efficient, but that's okay for now. We're going to look at some other efficient ways to do it. So what we're going to do here, let's look at like how this works now that we've got this coded up to see if it's going to work for us. So our first loop is going to set I to 0, and so like right here, it's going to give us a value of 10. And then it's going to jump down in here, and it's going to add 1 I plus 1, and that's going to give us a value of 15. It's going to add those numbers. 10 plus 15 is 25, and if the answer is equal to 10 plus 15, found is true. But we know the answer is 17. So 17 does not equal 10 plus 15 because 10 plus 15 is 25. So it would loop right here and go to the next value of y, add y to it, and then we'd get the next value. And so what happens here in this case is it would get 3, okay? And so 3 plus 10, the current value of I, would be 13. Does that equal 17? No, it would loop again, and it's going to find 7. And so 7 plus 10, in fact, is 17. Now, what if these were in different orders? What if I had this to 15, and I had this set right here to 10, and then I had this set to 3, okay? And so now what we can see is if we started at 0, we would loop through y, and we go 15 plus 3, and that doesn't equal 17. 15 plus 10 does not equal to 17. 15 plus 7 does not equal to 17. And when it got to the end here with numbers.length, it would exit here and then go here, and it would say, let's add 1 to y, and then it would start with 3. And then it would go here with let I equal plus 1 when it started over, and it would start here and grow. So would start here. So then it would say, okay, I've got 3, and now y is equal to I plus 1, which is, in this case, 1 on the index plus 1 would be 2, and that value would be 10. And so then it would loop over and say 10 is 3 plus 10, 17? No. Is 3 plus 7, 17? No. And then it would loop again, and then this time it would get the value 10, and then it would loop in here and say 10, get the next value be 10 plus 7, and then it would say, does 10 plus 7 equal 17? And that answer is true, and say found equals true, and then it would return and exit. All right, and so then it would work. All right, so I think it's going to work for us, but we also need one other function, and we're going to write a display function here, and we're just going to call this display sum. Okay, it doesn't take any parameters, and this is the function that we're going to wire up to our button so that we can show what's going on here. All right, so if I go down here and I need to like get the values from the page and do that. So like the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable called answer, and I'm going to set it equal to the document dot get element ID. And what I'm going to do is get the element on our web page called some value, and from there I'm going to get the value of that. What does that mean? And so if you remember back here on our HTML page that we named this some value, this input, which is the control that the user can enter a number in. And so right here, I'm calling it some value, and I'm getting the value out of that. So in the case of the default, it would be 17. Now I also need to define my number array. So I'm going to create something called an array, and this is how you define arrays. And I'm going to put my test data in here. So 10.15.3 or comma 7. Okay? And that's the sample problem that they give you. Now what we're going to show you later on is how we could generate random sets of data to search for. And that makes this a little bit more robust and a little bit more sophisticated. We think it's cool. Now the thing that we need to do is show the array on the screen. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, and the reason we can do that is we can go back to the document. I could say get element by ID, and I'm going to look for the num list, and I'm going to set its inner HTML value equal to the num array that we just defined. Now I'm also going to do something that you may not know. I'm going to say I'm going to convert that to a string, and what that does, it converts an array to a comma delimited string, and we'll show that on the screen here in a second. Okay, and so that's going to show our results on the string. So let's go ahead and wire this up to the front end. And so what I need to do on the front end, and if you've been following any of our tutorials, I hope you can watch them, is that we need an on-click event. And so every time the user clicks this button, I want it to call our JavaScript function called find sum. And I think, let's check, make sure, display sum. So we want to call our display function right here. And so let's just see if it works. So every time it clicks, it'll call our JavaScript function. And let's go live here. And Go Live is a server extension that you can install into Visual Studio Code. So let's see what it looks like. So this is it's running here, and you can see we got a default value of 17. Now all it's going to do right now is display our array. And you can see here it displayed it as a comma delimited list, 10, 15, 3, and 7. So that's pretty cool. But we've got more work to do, so we got to get this results showing down here. So let's do that next. All right. So let's go back to our JavaScript function. And one of the things that we want to do is we want to like call our JavaScript function. So let's do that. So, and we know our JavaScript function is going to return a Boolean value. So we're going to set our found Boolean variable equal to the return of this function. And so it's going to be called find sum A. And we know that our parameter, it takes some parameters. So it's showing us here that we have some numbers and an answer. And so we know that our num array, which we just defined, and our answer, which we just got from our document.getElementID call there. And so now that we've called our JavaScript function, we want to set the result to that in our results p tag, if you remember when we defined that. And so that's getElementById again, and I'm going to look for the control with the name of results. And I'm going to set its inner HTML value equal to found, and I'm going to convert this to a string. And there's a reason for this, but for now I'm going to make sure that whatever comes back out of here found is a string. I may return an array at one point in the future, so I want to make sure that that my code will always work. Okay, so that's pretty cool. So if I save this, I think that's all I need to do to actually do the first solve here. So let's go live and see if it actually works. So let's pull it over here. And let's look. So now we've got our UI here. We've got our default value 17, and when I hit search, it returns true, which is kind of cool. So we know that 10 plus 7 is true. So right away, if you've done this, we have solved the sum of all fears. But it's not the most efficient way to do it. And one of the things that in the interview question that's being passed around on the net is that you got bonus if you could do it in one array pass. So let's do this in one array pass, and let's write a new function to do that and to solve this in a more efficient way. So let's check that out. Okay, so our find sum A used two loops to do it, and essentially what we're doing is we're looping over the array, and then we're looping over the adjacent values again, adding them together to see if they equal the answer to 17. While that works, one of the problems with it is that we're looping over the array twice. And so what we want to do is, could we do this in one pass over the array? So this goes to efficiency. So when you have 4 values, it totally doesn't matter. But if you were looking through, say, 1,000,000 values or 100 million values, it would matter if you were looping over it more than once for every check. So let's find out a different way that we could do this. So let's write a new function, and we're going to call this find sum B. And it's going to take the same values that before. It's an array of numbers and an answer. Okay, and so let's scroll up here. And I thought I would explain a little bit about what I'm going to do. And this is a little bit more complicated than the last one, but I thought I'd explain kind of the concepts behind it and then go into the code. So what we're going to do is we are going to get the first and last values of the array, okay? But first, before we do that, we're going to sort it in ascending order, which means that we're going to have the lowest value in position 0 and the biggest value at the end of the array, okay? So our array at the end of the day, instead of it being 10, 15, 3, and 7, like this, we are going to sort it, and we're going to reorder it so that it looks like this. And since it is in a certain order, that allows us to give us some advantages to one of the things that we can do by just passing it at once. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the first value, which in this case will give us 3, and we're going to take the next value, or the last value, which would be 15. So the first time we come through, we're going to take the first value and the last value, and we're going to add those together, and that's going to give us 18. We're going to compare that to the answer of 17. So we're going to say, does 17 equal 18? And we know, no, that's not true. And then we're going to say, is the check value or from the addition, is that number bigger or smaller than the answer? In the case of this, it is going to be bigger. So if it's bigger, we're going to get the next largest number. So we're going to reduce our index, and we're going to get 10. And then we're going to add 3 and 10 together. And it's going to say, hey, is 3 and 10 equals 13? Does that equal 17? And we're going to say no. Is it bigger or smaller than the answer? And it's going to say it's smaller. So then we're going to increase it by going to the next smallest number up and add those two together, and that's going to be 7 plus 10. And what you'll notice is that we only had to go through this array once. Okay? And so that's pretty cool. All right? So let's code this up to see how this could work. Okay, so we're going to call this the sorted array method. And so the first thing I need is a found Boolean variable that I'm going to use to check to see if I found something. Okay, and the next thing I want to do is sort the array. And how you sort arrays in JavaScript is there are some built-in functions, but they don't work out of the box like you think they would. So there is a JavaScript .sort that would sort the array, but doesn't resort it in numerical values, sorts it in alphabetically. So alphabetically is not what we want. We want these sorted by value. So what we have to do is add something called a comparer function and pass that into the sort function. And so like we can create a function and it's a comma b, and what this does is it does the sorting for you, and this actually compares the value adjacent to it and then moves it around in the array, and it says it return a minus b. And all this does is, based on the return value from the statement a minus b, it knows how to reorder the array from there. You can read all about this in the JavaScript docs, but to sort an array numerically, you've got to return this kind of function or comparer function written in this way. Hopefully that makes sense. If not, leave a comment and we will reach out to you and try to explain it more to you. So what I'm going to do now that I have my array sorted, so now it's 3, 7, 10, and 15, what do I need to do? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is say, where do I want to start? I want to start at the beginning. So my start index is going to equal to 0, and then I want to go ahead and set my end index. And I'm going to set it equal to numbers.length minus 1. Now you'll remember in the first time that we did this that numbers.length will return 4, but since it starts with 0, the index we want for the end one is 3. Okay, so even though it's the length of 4, its index at the last position is 3, so we want 4 minus 1, which is 3. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to loop over this array, but we're not going to use a for loop like we did before. We're going to use something called a do loop. And do is do this while this condition is met. Okay, and we'll type this condition in a second, but the first thing we're going to do is let's do the addition to see if what's true. So I also need to declare this check value. So I need a check value. And my check value is going to equal to the numbers, the array, and I'm going to put in the start index. Okay? And then I'm going to add the numbers array. Wow, that's weird. And I'm going to put in the end index. Okay, and that's going to return the value at that index. So at position 0, the first time it's going to return 3, and then at the index it's going to return 15. Okay, and so that's going to set my check value equal to 3 plus 15 in the first pass to 18. Okay, so then we can compare that to the answer. So we write an if statement and we say, hey, if answer, and we'll say equal equal, which means do an equality check and return true or false, equals the check value, do something. All right, and so it says if answer equal equals check value, I'm going to set, if that's true, I'm going to set my found equal to true, and then I'm going to break. A break statement will exit this loop. And we're going to type this in here, and then we'll go over it to see why it works. Okay, so then else if, and I'm going to say if the answer is also, if it's greater than the check value. Okay, so if it's not equal, but it's greater than the check value, I'm going to do some things. And what I want to do, if it's greater than the check value, I want to increment the start index by 1. Else, if the answer is less than the check value, I'm going to decrement the end index. And I do that with minus minus. Okay, and we'll walk through this in a second. Now, finally, what I'm going to do in this do loop is I'm going to write a while statement here. And this is the condition that I want it to exit on. So found equals false, as long as that's true, and the start index less than the end index. So what I don't want to happen is that through my adding and subtracting on the start index and index, that they cross over each other. I'll show you why that's in a second, because what's going to happen is these two indexes are going to meet in the middle, and I want to stop once it gets to the middle. I don't want it to go on endlessly. And then at the end of all of this, I'm just going to return found, and this do loop will either return a true or a false. And once the start index or the index crosses each other, it'll exit out if it doesn't find anything at all. Okay, so that is how you would do it in one pass. And so let's really look through and kind of examine what's going on here. Okay, so let's look at our default values, 3, 7, 10, and 15. So remember, 3 is at position 0, 15 is at position 3. Okay, so we've sorted this array, and now it looks like this. And we've declared our start index will start at 0, and our index will be 3. So the first time through, it'll say 3 plus 15. And that will give us a check value of 18. And we'll go down here and say, okay, if answer equals check value. In other words, if answer is equal to check value, found is equal to true, and just get out. So let's check it out. So 17, does 17 equal 15 plus 3 or 18? And the answer is no. So what happens is it goes to the next statement and say, does 17, is it greater than the check value of 18? And the answer is that no. So then it'll go down to the next if statement. It'll say, is answer less than the check value? And it'll say, yes, that is true. And what it will do is it'll take this index and reduce it by 1. So it started out as 3, and now it is 2. And so then it comes down here when it founds it, and it'll say, does found equal false? And that's true. Is the start index less than the end index? This is 2, this is 0, that's also true. So it will loop back around, okay? And so now we have a start index of 0 and an end index of 2. So let's look back at our array here, okay? And I'm going to copy this down so we don't have to scroll. And so we can see that at position 0, it is 3. At position 2, it is 10. So it's going to get 10 plus 3 equals 13. And so again, let's walk it through one more time. So if answer equals 13, we know the answer is 17. We know that's not true, so it won't go down into here. And then I'll say, is answer greater than the check value? Is 17 greater than 13? That is true. So now my start index is going to add to that, okay? And then because it found it here, it's going to come down to this while statement. So is found equal false? It's still false, and start index is now 1, end index is 2, so it's still less than each other, and so it'll loop. And so now what we have is my start index is 2, or 1, and my end index is 2. So it's going to say 10 plus 7, or 7 plus 10 equals 17. And so when it comes in here, it'll say if answer equals check value, if answer equals 17, if 17 equals 17, found will now be equal to true, because it's now those two are equal, and then it breaks out of this while loop. And so now it will return true. Okay, so that's how that works. And as long as we have spelled everything correctly, got it all coded in here, we should be able to just change our function call right here and test it out. So we're going to use find sum B instead of find sum A. Go live here. So let's see if this works. Okay, so we still have our UI here. We have our inner number is 17. And so we're calling our new function here. So let's hit find it. And look, it worked. 10, 15, 3, and 7. We printed it out before we sorted it. So it's still the same values that we searched, but we sorted it internally. And now we're returning true. So that's how you would do it in one pass. But I have one other way that we could do it that I think is a little bit more elegant and a little bit less coding than the sorted array method. And we'll talk about that in just a second. So let's break into code and write a new function to solve the sum of all fears in a different way. Okay, so what we're going to do is find another way, a third way to solve this problem. And I think the way we're going to show you is what I would think a better or more elegant way to do it than the previous one with the sorted array method. So let's call this a better way. A more elegant way. And we're going to start off by writing a function, and we'll call it find sum C. And that is going to take numbers as an array, and we're also going to have an answer as well that we've been doing all day. And so the first thing that we need to do is let's set up our check value. And our check value is what we're going to use to check to see if we have a value that's equal to 17 or something like that. And then we'll set to 0. And then we also need to set up another variable, and we'll just use found, and it's another Boolean that we're going to track to see if our search has been successful. And so the one thing we're going to do is we're going to loop over this array just like we have been in 4. So we're going to create a loop here. And so we're going to let I equal 0. We're going to start at the beginning. And then I is less than or equal to numbers dot length minus 1. And then every time it loops around, we're just going to add 1 to it. So our basic setup of a loop that we've been doing before. Now here's where we're going to do something just a little bit different. So check this out. I think this is pretty neat. So I'm going to take I'm going to get the check value, and I'm going to set it equal to the answer minus the numbers at the current position, which is numbers I. Semicolon. So what this will do is this will say, let's say that we get to the first position and it is 10, and then so 10 or 17 minus 10 would equal 7. And so what I could do then, now that I know the check value that I want to get, I can go look to see if 7 exists in the array. If it does, I am done. So let's just write a quick if statement here, and I can do numbers, and I can use an array method which is called includes. And what includes does is allows me to look into it, into the array, to see if the check value exists. And how you do this is you pass it the check value that you're looking for, and then you need a start position, because we don't want to start at 0 every time. If we've been looping through the array, we've already checked the previous number, so we just need to check the next number in the sequence. So we can easily do that by doing this, I plus 1. And I plus 1 is basically, don't check the current number, but just check any number after the number that I'm looking at and see if it equals that check value. And if it does, it'll say we can set found equal to true, and we can break out of the loop here. And then after this is all looped through, we can return found. So let's go over it one more time. So we create a loop, and we go from 0 to the end of the array, minus 1. We get the check value by taking the answer that we're given, the thing that we know, in the case of the default is 17, and we subtract the current value at the array. So in the case of how our array is functioned, this would be 17 minus 10, and that would equal 7. And then we just simply go and using a built-in array function and say, does this value exist in the array, and start searching in the next position and that I'm at. The next, not the current position, but the position plus 1. If that's true, that means that those two numbers add up to 17, like we were asked, and I can set my variable found to true, and I can break. And break will dump me out of this loop and hit return. And so that we loop over it one time, and we just use this includes to check to see if our addition. So a little bit different, but let's check out and see if that works. Okay, so C, change that to C, and we'll go using live over here, and we'll go live. So we went live here, and so we've got our default value of 17. We'll hit find, and we can see that 10 plus 7 is in fact true. But what if we change this value to say 14? And we change it to 14. We got here, and it's false. What if we set it to equal to 10? Now look at this. This 3 plus 7 would be 10, so that would find true. Now one of the test cases here that I want to make you aware of is you could type in 20. And if you search from the current position and not plus 1, this would actually return true, because it would say that 10, and then because when we're saying at 20, 10 minus 10, or 20 minus 10 would be 10. So it would look at this value and give you a false result. But since I did a plus 1 over here, right here, that allowed me to go to the next iteration, and so it won't find any answer. So it'll add 10 plus 15 plus 3 plus 7, and none of those equal 20. So this should return false, and that's what it does. So that's find some C, but there is one more way that we can do this. So let's do something a little bit different. And I'm going to write a function that will actually return an array of all the possible answers that could be found in the array, instead of just returning true or false when we found the first one. So let's return all possible combos. And let's print those on the screen. So what we'll need is a function. And this is a little bit different. This won't return true or false. It will return an array. So let's call this find some D. And as we've been doing all day, this will take numbers and an answer. A numbers array and an answer. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to create a variable called check value. Set that equal to 0, and then we need a let, and we're going to check the check index here. We'll set it equal to -1. Now the check index will be the index or the position in the array that we find the check value at. And then we need to create an array, an empty array here. And this is going to hold an array of strings, formatted strings, that will display like 10 plus 7, those kind of things. This is where all of our answers will be held, and we'll display those on the screen. So to do this, we do need a loop. So let's declare another loop. And just like we've been doing in the past, we want to loop from the position 0 all the way to the end. And then every time it loops, we want to add one to the loop. So we've been doing that. Should be pretty efficient at doing that now. So the other thing that I want to do is I want to set the check value just like we did before, which is the answer minus the numbers sub I. And that is how we did it in check some C, or find some C. And so we're going to do the same kind of check. But here's where it gets a little bit different. So I want to get the check index of this value. So my check value returns 7. And what I want to do is I want to find the location in the array that, that this value occurs in. And so I can do that with an array function. And so I'm going to type in numbers dot, and I'm going to use an array method here called index of. An index of will return the position of the first occurrence. And so like this check value, we can say, look for this check value and give me the index of that. Pretty cool, right? So what I can do is, now that I have the check index, we can check the return value of this index and do something with it. So the index of will return -1 if it doesn't find anything. So let's write an if statement. And we're going to say if check index not equal to -1, okay, and it's not the current one. And so we want to make sure that it is not equal to the current one. Then do some things, because we don't want to look at it with the check index of the current one, because we don't want to check it twice. We just want to make sure that it's two unique numbers that add up to that. Okay, so if it's not equal to 1, which we did find a value, and it's not equal to the current value, let's add the two numbers to the array. And so I'm going to say answer.array, and I'm going to use another function, another built-in function, and this is called push. And what push does is allows me to add values to this array. And what I'm going to do is add a string, a formatted string, to do this. So I'm going to take numbers I, which is the current number, and then I'm going to add a plus sign there, and that's so that it can print out, you know, 10 plus, and then I'm going to take the check value, the number that we found in the array. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to remove the second number, or the check value number, from the array, because I don't want to check it again. So if I get 10 plus 7, I don't want to come back later on and then print out 7 plus 10, because it's actually the same. So I don't want duplicates. So I'm going to remove the second number from the array so that it won't find another result or a duplicate value. And this is done easily by numbers dot, and then I'm going to use this other array function called splice. And splice allows me to remove elements from array, and it uses the check index to do that, which we found. And then you can tell it the next parameter is how many elements do you want to remove. And I just want to remove one number. And so what this will do is modify this array in place. You don't have to set it to anything else. It'll modify it in place, and that's really important for what we're doing here. Okay, so now the next thing I need to do is, just at the end of this loop, is I just want to return the answer array. And that's how you do it. And so how we call this, let's make another function to call this. So we've been using this display sum. And so what I want to do is go ahead and make a new function called display all sums. We could modify this one, but I just want to keep that one separate in case we just show you how it worked before when I push this code out to our Git. And I'm going to copy the code from display sum because we're going to modify it a little bit. It's going to behave a little bit different, but I do want to show you some differences in how this works. And you notice here in find sum C that our found variable is a boolean, and that's because it's getting its value from the return of this. And now this is now a string, or an array of string. You can see how it's defined, and it's defined by that. But because of the way arrays work, I can still say found.toString, and it'll print out a comma delimited list for me like it did up here in the num array. So they do work identical at this point, but let's just check it out to see if our function works. So what we need to do here is we need to make sure that we call find sum D from our front end. So from here, I'm going to play display all sums. And so that should work there. Let's go back here. Let's go live. So now we're going to display all sums here. So now that it's running here and we're calling our right function, I'll make this a little bit smaller. And so we got a 17 as a default value. And look, see, now it's displaying the result of 10 plus 7. And that's the correct answer it found. So let's modify the values in the array to see if we can get more than one answer, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to add some more values to this. So I'm going to add a 2 and a 16. So now that we know that 15 plus 2 is 17, 16 plus 3 is 19, 10 plus 7 would be 17. Okay, so we'll refresh our page here. Make sure we save all here. And I'll refresh our page, and I'm going to hit 17 here, and we should get 2 answers. And we do. So like now you get 10 plus 7 and then 15 plus 2. And so that could be good enough, but I want to show you one more thing that would make this UI just a little bit better. And then I want to show you how we could actually randomize this array here so we can have a bunch of random numbers coming back. So there's one other thing that we could do here. And so like what I'm going to do is, since find sum D returns an array, that means I can dot here and actually call a function. And I'm going to use something called the join method. And what the join method is going to do is allow me to override what the separating value is. So in this case, I'm actually going to do a little break tag. And what this will do, instead of putting a comma, it'll hit a break tag. And since I'm calling this to enter HTML, this will cause it to function like HTML, and it'll put them on separate lines. And I think that's a little bit better when you're showing num plus 3. And let me show you how that would work. So let's bring our UI back over here, and we hit find it. And you can see what it did here. It actually put a breaking tag between it, and now we got 10 plus 7, 15 plus 2. That's purely an aesthetic thing that I did, and I think it looks better that way, but you can obviously put it as comma delimited, or you could override that and make this the pipe symbol or whatever you want to do. But how could we also generate some random numbers in this array? And so that we don't have this hard-coded array, so that people could actually use this. So let's do one more function, and let me show you how that would work. And so I'm going to put this down at the end here, and we're going to say generate some random numbers. Let me scroll up. And so I'm going to write a function called generate numbers. And this function is going to take a max, which means we can say how many numbers we want to generate, whether it be 10, 15, 20, or 25, or whatever. Okay. Now this function will have, we're going to declare an array here, and we're going to put the numbers in this array. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a while loop, and what this while loop is going to do is look into the array to see if this number already exists, and it's also going to check to see if the length of the array has hit its max yet. So I don't want it to go on forever. I just want it to go on to the max. So while array dot length is less than the max is the first check here. So that max may come in at 20, and as long as I have less than 20 elements in this, keep on going, okay? So what I can do is I can set a variable called R for random, okay? And then I'm going to do something called math.floor. Now math.floor will give me the integer value from the value entered. So if I have 5.2 in here, it would give me 5. And that's real important how this is going to work. So because the next thing I want to do is I want to call math.random. Okay, and it's going to be in the random function. Now what random does is gives me a pseudo-random number between 0 and 1. And I think that's important that this is pseudo-random. In other words, it's pretty good. It's not to be used for trying to get keys for security or anything like that. But it's pseudo random. It's fairly random. Okay. Now what I want to do, but that'll give me a number between 0 and 1. So it could be like 0.53978 or something like that. So what I can do is I can multiply that by 100, and then it would be 5.3978 or something like that. Okay. And then I can go ahead and put the floor on that and then add 1 to it. And so that this would return 5, and then add 1, and it would be 6. Okay. And so like that will give me a random number or a pseudo random number. And I think that's good enough for what were our purposes here. So then what I can do is I want to add it to my number array. And so like if you remember what we did in FindSumD, we used a couple of functions that you'll see. So I want to say the index of, and I say if the index of R, and you guessed it, it's not equal to 1, or it's equal to -1, or equal. So it's equal to -1, then that means that I did not find it. So if the array.index of R is equal to -1, then I know that it doesn't exist. So I want to go ahead and add it to it. So like this will be an array.push, just like we did before, and we'll push the value, which is that number, into the array. And then at the end, when it's done, when we've got our max, we'll just return the array back. And so that is how we're going to generate our random numbers. So pretty cool. So I'm going to go back up to my display all sums here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace this line of code with my generated code here. So I'm going to say let, and I'm going to comment this one out. So this would be like kind of like our test data, but now we're going to use our generated data. And I'm just going to call the generate numbers function, and I'm going to set that equal to 20, which I want 20 random numbers between 0 and 100. It's pretty cool, right? So and then that's pretty much all I need to do to get generated numbers in there. Now what we'll see is every time we run it, this string will change every time, and we'll see new values on there. So let's check it out and to see kind of how this works. So I've got my default value of 17. I'm going to hit find here and watch what happens. And you notice that it put together a bunch of random numbers here between 0 and 100. And they didn't find anything that added to 17. So okay, so let's increase the number here, and maybe we can get it to work here. So you can see it created these numbers here, and then 47 plus 3, it found it. 2 plus 48, it found it. Now it found 2, 32 plus 18, 40 plus 10. So if you're doing the math here, it actually really works. So I think this right here would be suitable for showing someone else what you could do with this coding challenge, because really what they're trying to do is figure out, can you code? And so while it doesn't answer their example perfectly, it does show a little bit more about how this would work utilizing their problem scenario that they gave you, and then you just gave them all of the numbers back. Also generating random numbers is kind of cool. And then allowing them to supply any input they want is also a step forward. So I think if you can put this on your Git, if you can put this on the whiteboard, if you could whiteboard some of these solutions, I think that would be great. I hope this helps. Good luck and keep coding.